All right. Welcome, everyone. So glad y'all could join us tonight. My name is Caitlin. I work at Square Books. So before we dive into the main event, Melissa Ginsberg's wonderful The House Uptown, I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping and talk about some upcoming events that y'all may be interested in. Tomorrow night at 5 p.m., we'll be hosting Ralph Eubanks on Zoom for A Place Like Mississippi, a journey through a real and imagined literary landscape. He'll be joined in conversation with the owner of Square Books, Richard Howarth, and should be a really wonderful talk. The book is just gorgeous. You should check it out when you have a moment. Next event will be this Thursday at 6 p.m. That'll be in partnership with the Oxford Film Festival. We'll be hosting University of Mississippi professor Joe Atkins for his book, Harry Dean Stanton, Hollywood Zen Rebel, and he'll be joined in conversation with local writer, no relation, Ace Atkins. So check that out. And then the last event I want to tell you about is next Tuesday. It'll be at 5:30 p.m. We'll be hosting Malcolm Brooks. He's the author of Painted Horses, which I know many of y'all love. He'll be joined in conversation with Julia Whelan, who is an audiobook narrator for his book, Cloudmaker. So I'm excited to hear that conversation and kind of how the audiobook part all weaves into it. But so housekeeping done. I'd like to introduce y'all to our two guests tonight. First, Melissa Ginsburg, author of The House Uptown. She was born and raised in Houston, Texas, and she attended the Iowa Writers Workshop. She's the author of the novel Sunset City and the beautiful poetry collection Dear Weathered Ghost. She teaches creative writing and literature at the University of Mississippi here in Oxford. And she is joined in conversation with Maurice Carlos Ruffin, who's the author of We Cast a Shadow, which was a finalist for the PEN Faulkner Award and the PEN Open Book Award. A recipient of the Iowa Review Award in Fiction, he has been published in the Virginia Quarterly Review, the Kenyon Review, and the compilation Unfathomable City, a New Orleans Atlas. He's a native of New Orleans, and he is currently the Grisham Writer in Residence here at the University of Mississippi. He also has another book coming out called The Ones Who Don't Say They Love You. It's a book of short stories that'll be out in August. And he was just telling me that he worked on some of the revisions while he was a writer in residence. So I'm going to hand it off to Melissa and Maurice. I'll come back to moderate questions. So please submit those into the Q&A. And thank y'all so much for joining us. Have fun.
Hey,
Thanks, Caitlin.
So I think I'm just going to say a brief word about this book. A few months ago, I got an email from Melissa, and I'm always happy to get messages from Melissa because either it's like fresh eggs or fresh vegetables, or it's a very good book, and that's what I have here. I was so happy to read it and so happy to blurb it. If you don't know, this is the book is called The House Uptown, and I was just thinking this morning that two of my favorite story types are either somebody leaves home or somebody returns home. And so in this story, you have a 14-year-old young woman named Ava, orphan, who comes down from the Midwest to New Orleans to live with her grandmother, Lane. And I was really touched throughout the narrative at the depth of attention that Melissa pays to these characters, including Oliver, who's sort of the third leg of the stool in the book. So I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I will say, if you don't have it, you should get it. You won't be disappointed. And I think now we're going to have some words from Melissa.
Thanks, Maurice. So I wanted to just read a little bit from the beginning of the novel. This is a section of a chapter that occurs early in the book. So Ava is the 14-year-old orphan who comes to New Orleans to live with her grandmother, Lane. And this takes place the day after Ava's arrival. And it's the first time that Lane and Ava are alone in the house together. Lane rose from her nap to early afternoon light. Her body felt heavy and weak. She needed to fix an iced coffee, smoke, and get back to her research. The restaurant owners wanted their family members depicted in the painting. They'd sent in photos last week that Lane hadn't even glanced at yet. There was so much to do. What had woken her? Lane had vivid and disturbing dreams. They often left her disoriented, more drained than when she lay down to rest. She sighed and stretched, trying to rouse herself. As she shuffled down the long back hall, she heard a noise. Perhaps she left the radio on, though it didn't sound like the radio. She listened, a girl's voice. Lane walked to the sideboard where she kept the pistol, took it out of the drawer. She'd heard about these neighborhood break-ins, home invasions. The voice was coming from the enclosed porch above the carport. There was nothing in there to steal besides Mardi Gras costumes, but she supposed burglars wouldn't know that. The door was open. It sounded like the girl was on the phone. Is this what they did now? Chatted casually with their friends, as if everyone's homes were their personal space? She almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Lane peeked around the doorway. A tall, skinny girl sat cross-legged on the bed. She was pale, with dull brown hair, a nothing of a girl. Lane pointed the gun in her direction and stepped into the room. "Get out of my house," she said. The girl stared, her mouth opened in shock. Lane said again, "Get out." The girl seemed frozen. She didn't take her eyes off the gun. Then she smiled, or tried to. "Lane, you startled me," she said. "Is that real? Is it part of a costume?" Something was off. It was one of those confusing, dreamlike moments. This girl knew her name. Slowly, Lane nodded. "Yes," she said, "it's part of a costume." Lane tucked the gun in the pocket of her dress, the weight of it making the fabric sag. "I need some caffeine," she said. The girl followed her to the kitchen. She was tentative. Lane had no patience for these timid, soft types of girls. This was one of those weak ones, Lane could tell. She hovered in the doorway while Lane fixed coffee. "Is there anything to eat?" Ava asked. "Look for yourself." Lane didn't like being near the girl. She took her coffee and went to her studio. She opened her sketchbook and flipped the pages until she found what she hoped was there, an explanation of some sort. In her own handwriting, she saw a note. "Phone call from Iowa, Louise's friend. Louise is dead. Ava visit June 3rd. Louise is dead. She read the words and watched her mind skip past them without comprehension. The girl was Ava then. She checked the date on her phone. Today was the 4th. It added up. Lane reached in her pocket. Something heavy tugged at the fabric. She pulled out the gun, turned it over in her hand. She must have meant to clean it. Well, she didn't have time for that now. She put it back in the sideboard.
All right. Thank you, Melissa, for reading that. So we're going to take questions in a little while, but first, Melissa and I are going to chat a bit about the book. And, that passage you read, it was so interesting to me because Lane is a character, she's the grandmother of Ava, and we see right there in that passage how, Lane is a bit on in years. She's suffering apparently some memory loss or dementia or whatever the diagnosis is. And we see in that scene, she has the gun, but by the end of the scene, she's forgotten why the gun was in her hand. I guess opening this up, this is a good place to start. This concept for the book, where did it come from?
Well, one of the reasons I wanted to write about a character like this is there's dementia in my family. My mother suffers from dementia, and I was really interested in the relationship between identity and memory, and what makes a person who they are when memories start to become inconsistent or to fade away. And so Lane, and I also started thinking a lot about what lasts after memory is gone. And Lane is an artist, and she cares a great deal about her work in the book. It's the only thing she cares about for most of the book. And so I just wanted to think about those questions, and writing a novel is like a way to think about those more carefully, I guess. I should say too, Lane is nothing like my actual mom. She's made up. But that part of it inspired the idea of Lane's situation.
Can I ask, were there other characters or people in the world who you thought about when you were creating Lane as a character?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about myself. I thought about all the writers and artists I know. Especially women, because one of the things that frustrates Lane is she just wants to do her work, and she has very little patience for everything that gets in the way of that. She would like to exist in a space where all she has to think about is her art and all of the details of life that allow people to just, eat and pay bills. She would like all of that to just be handed to her and not have to ever think about it once. She's in a race against time, because she knows something's wrong with her, and she wants to complete her work before she can't anymore. So yeah, I certainly can relate to that. When I want to work on writing, when I want to work on poems, and I have to instead work on taxes or something like that, So I think that that's a really common thing that happens with anyone who is passionate about what they do. And I'm an obsessive writer, and Lane is an obsessive painter. So I certainly drew on my own experience of those kinds of things.
I can't relate at all. I just love doing abstracting work as much as possible. No, but seriously, you brought that point up about Lane wanting to focus on her work. I definitely understand that. I think any artist or writer understands that. And of course, in the book, we have our third main character, Oliver, who was very much there for the purpose of making Lane's everyday life easier. What I really liked about Oliver is, as a native New Orleanian myself, he's a total New Orleans guy. Like, he's a good dude, but he just like doesn't care about like rules or like, what people expect him to do. Can you talk about creating him as a character in the book?
I so appreciate you said that, because it means a lot to me that a New Orleanian would think that I could write a real New Orleanian. That's a great compliment. So thank you. Oliver is, he's probably, I mean, I know a lot of people like Oliver in New Orleans and outside of New Orleans. And I think he's probably the character in the book who's closest to me, to my personality and the way I interact with the world. But the fun thing about fiction is he can do stuff in the book that I wouldn't actually do. So yeah, I also think that Lane needs somebody like Oliver who is willing to be totally loyal and do whatever she needs, but also call her on it when she's being ridiculous. And also, if he has to break the law or go against what seems appropriate in order to help her, he won't hesitate to do that. So they found each other, and they're a really good match. They're quite devoted to one another and dependent on each other in interesting ways.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, so clearly Lane and Oliver had this ongoing sort of working relationship, and we have Ava, who has lost her mother. And I remember Kurt Vonnegut in his talk about the shapes of stories. He says that, what worse could happen to a young woman than to lose their mother. And so with Ava, she doesn't have an Oliver, and she doesn't really even know Lane at all. So I was just wondering, in creating this sort of situation, was it difficult to get to the mindset of somebody like Ava, who is so young and so alone, and like hops, public transport and comes down to a brand new city by herself?
Yeah, so Ava was definitely the most challenging character for me to write. It's difficult to write a teenage character because it has been many, many decades since I was a teenager, partly. And but she's also inspired by kids I knew in Iowa, including my own stepsons. And the sort of entry point for Ava was that even though these charming and sweet Midwestern kids seemed quite foreign to me when I first met them, they, I still loved them. And I love Ava. And she's just lost everything that she knows, and she's totally alone. And it's easy for me to, not trying to be dramatic or anything, but it's easy for me to imagine feeling that way, So I was able to sort of inhabit Ava through her emotional responses to her terrible situation. And even when the ways that she acts and the ways that she thinks are not really the ways that I would think.
I often say when I'm talking to other writers about writing, and we talk about different people write different genres, whether it's screenplays or stage plays or fiction or nonfiction. My personal opinion, I really believe this. I think that poets have an advantage over most other writers. I think that if you're a poet, you sort of have all the abilities, like you're the queen on the chessboard. So I do want you to talk to us a bit about, well, people who don't know, you've written some poetry. I mean, you've published in amazing places. How does your poetry writing play into this book?
Well, my poetry writing, I think that I allowed myself to think more like a poet when I was writing this book than I did probably in my first book, where I was just trying to learn how to write fiction. So it obviously affects the way that I think about language, but also the way I think about image and setting, place, and the emotional situations that these characters get into. And I don't know, I always write poems. I write poems all the time. So it's sort of, I let myself not turn that off when I was working on this novel. So yeah, it's still like I'm one person, and I wrote this, and I also wrote poems. So I think there are lots of similarities in terms of the kinds of details that I notice, that I pay attention to, that my characters pay attention to. There's also, there are moments in this book that I allowed myself to include what felt almost like brief prose poems. I hope that's probably, I don't want to say too much because it's like spoilers, but yeah, I definitely allowed my poet self to be in this book in a way that was really, really fun, made it fun for me.
Well, early in the book, we learned that Lane, despite her mental difficulties and her age, is still a working artist. And I was struck particularly by whenever you're describing anything she's working on in the book. The language is very, it's beautiful, and I can see what she's working on. I can see it through her eyes also. It's not as if the book is explaining it. I feel like Lane herself is describing what she's seeing as an artist. And I guess I want to ask, are you also a painter?
I I did some visual art when I was younger, and I did a lot of photography. And I wouldn't say that I am a painter now because it's been so long and I haven't ever done it seriously, but I love to look at art, and I know a lot of painters, and so it's definitely a part of my like just general awareness and visual landscape. And I also like, I think painters are more interesting to write about than writers because they can just sort of like they can do more fun stuff while they're working. Like when I write, I have to have total quiet. And if someone interrupts me, it like ruins everything for a period of time, but the painters I know listen to podcasts, talk on the phone, take breaks and, like go do fun stuff and come back and like finish a painting in the middle of the night, so that kind of flexibility and dynamic felt right for Lane and was fun to write about.
So the book is set in New Orleans, and New Orleans is one of America's most unique cities. It's one of the most particular cities in the world. People know about New Orleans everywhere, and I want to commend you on your braveness, because I can say, like, even myself, I haven't like written a full length book about New Orleans. My novel was set like in some future unnamed city. My collection is just a bunch of short stories. But I really thought that this book is capturing the sort of, I mean, how to describe it. It's not even like the most accurate way of saying it, but there's a sort of hominess about being in New Orleans today. I think people miss. They think New Orleans, Mardi Gras, parties, games, yada, yada, yada. But it's the Uptown house, the House Uptown, that is really like the sort of center of what's happening here. Can you talk about deciding to write a book that's set in New Orleans and what sort of maybe adjustments you made to get it right in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I have always wanted to write about New Orleans. It's a city that I have known really well since I was a kid, as well as you can, as an outsider. And there is like a hard limit to that. Like I will never know what it's like to be from there. I've never actually lived there. But I did, and I was nervous about it because if you get something wrong, people from New Orleans do not take that lightly. And so I was like, this is a risk, but I'm gonna try and do it. So my family's from New Orleans. My mom grew up in this house that is the house uptown. I mean, I embellished it, but this was my grand's house. And so it was always like such a powerful, like magnetic place to me. The location, the architecture, there's like an energy coming out of that house that and it's the house my mom, my aunts grew up in, and all of my siblings and all of my cousins, I think feel the same way. And yeah, so I think about houses a lot. I think about that house a lot and have over the years. It's not it's not in my family anymore. My grand sold it many years before she passed away. But it will always hold a really important place for me and for my family, and when I'm in town, I drive past it. They were renting it as a Airbnb, and I would love to rent it and stay there and just see like what improvements they've made. I don't know. I love houses, and that's one of my favorites. So I just let myself put into the book all of that, all of the gravity that house holds for me.
You have to rent that house out and report back to us. I really want to know what you think about it, because they say you can't go home again, but maybe you can.
Well, somebody has put a lot of money into it. It looks very nice from the outside now. Yeah, I would love to rent it and have a big party there.
There's one more character who's running around who I thought was an interesting New Orleans type, and it's Artie. And we meet Artie pretty early on, and I just thought it was interesting. We learned very early in the book that he's running for public office, And maybe politicians are kind of the same everywhere, but I just thought he was like a very New Orleans type of politician. He's he's glad-handing, he's smoozing, he's got charisma, and he thinks he kind of runs the entire world. Were you? What is talk about him? What do you have to say about Artie?
Well, we see Artie in as a teenager in the book, and then later the book moves around in time a little bit. Artie's father was also a local politician, and so he's sort of born into this. He's talented. He's this this kind of anointed person, and he's like better at it than he even means to be. And so I was really interested in looking at Artie as a kid when he's still when he has all of that charisma and all of that talent, but doesn't know how to handle it yet, doesn't understand the way that people are responding to him. Like, everyone wants to get his attention and be by his side, and he's just like a sort of sweet kid who would rather be alone a lot of the time. But then it's he grows up and he takes on this thing that he was born to do, that all of his family expects of him. And he does genuinely love New Orleans, and he genuinely wants to help, but anybody with that kind of power or access to that kind of power, it doesn't stay clean for very long. So Artie is sort of in this moral struggle with himself his whole life, and that interested me. He's not necessarily a good guy, but I do feel for Artie too in the book.
Yeah, I mean, I really thought he was interesting because it is clear, like you said, that he loves New Orleans. And I hadn't thought until you said it just now. It's almost like he and Oliver are flip sides of the same coin, where Oliver sort of does the dark arts for a good purpose, and Artie, not so much. So, let's see. We did have some questions here from our attendees. I'm going to start with one from Joshua Wynn, if y'all don't mind me saying your names out loud here. So Joshua says, in regards to it's a craft question. In regards to your process, did you come up with the ending of the story and then work your way? Oh, my computer's freezing up. Then work your way towards the ending, or did you start with the beginning and then explore the possibilities from there?
So before I started writing, I knew how it was going to end. The middle was the part I had to work out. I knew how it was going to start too. It starts when Ava arrives in New Orleans, like she puts all of these things in motion. Her presence disrupts the lives of everyone else in the book. And so it had this kind of really, really natural place to start. And I understood that the decisions that everybody makes in the book were going to have repercussions that would not be easy or good for the people that they loved, and so that was sort of I wrote towards it, and I did not always know how to get to that, and I also ended up doing dramatic restructuring of the manuscript at least twice. So yeah, and that's a crazy mental exercise to like hold an entire novel in your head and then shuffle around all the events. So a lot of the revising was like extensive because I had things in the wrong order.
Yeah, I think many of us who've written novels, like yourself and myself, it's kind of like holding a bunch of plates, stacked up, and it's like, am I really going to try and move these things around in midair like this? But I think you succeeded here very well.
Thank you.
So we have a question here from Chris Morris, and Chris asks, "Thank you so much for this novel, Melissa. Considering how different this book is from your debut in terms of genre, subject matter, etc. How did you go about approaching a second novel? How did you break free of, or did you even feel any pulls towards the familiarity of your first book?
I mean, there there are similarities. I think this book is just sort of a bigger story, and it does some technical things differently. Like it's third person, it moves around in time, it goes into multiple points of view. I hadn't done any of that before, um, but it still has elements of crime thriller. You know, it has those tropes in it, and it still, you know, deals with shady characters. You know, so I think that, and I think that it just evolved pretty naturally. I didn't think too much about like what Sunset City was trying to do when I was writing this. I just had these people in my head and I wrote this book for them. I mean, I still feel this way. Like I mean, I know they're not real. Like I do get that, but they feel so real to me. And I just wanted to make their book as good as it could be for them. So that's really what I thought about. I just thought about getting it right for Lane, essentially, and for Oliver.
There's definitely a draw for all of us fiction writers to make sure that we're giving our characters the right kind of due. Um, I imagine that maybe that's not a pressure we have in different types of writing. So I see here Jennifer Key asks, what type of writing do you most enjoy?
Uh, Gosh, well, I mean, I love to write poems, and I feel most grounded and most connected to the world and to, you know, my sense of self when I'm writing poems a lot. Um, so yeah, I would say that's definitely like feels more like my native tongue. But there were, you know, like I've also written hundreds and hundreds of poems and only 2 novels. So maybe part of that is just because of practice. Yeah, but I'm definitely more, I feel more fluent as a poet for sure.
All right. I see we have a question just popped up from Linda Flynn. Are you going to focus on the poetry collection next or starting on the novel?
Um, yeah, so both. I am I have a poetry collection coming out next year, and that one's pretty much done. I have another one that I'm writing now that I think is pretty close to being at least a first draft of a whole book. Um, and then once I sort of tie that up and get a draft of it, I can set it aside and start a new novel. Um, but I have like a shadow of a corner of an idea for that. It is way too soon to talk about.
Works for me. Let's see. Jonathan Hop asked, all right, first he says, this is a wonderful conversation tonight. He thanks us. Thank you very much, Jonathan, for that. Melissa, given that you've now written about 2 cities dear to your life, Houston and New Orleans, what places are calling to your imagination now? Will you ever, for example, write about Oxford?
I don't know if I could write about Oxford. I would definitely write about New Orleans again. And I think that the next book is probably going to be New Orleans book. Oxford is, I've only been here 10 years. I don't know it well enough. And I also have never written a book about a place when I was in that place. So it's pretty, I mean, I couldn't write about Houston until after I moved away. And I wrote I wrote some of this book in New Orleans, but most of it not in New Orleans. Yeah, I mean, Oxford is great and I'm so happy to be here and be part of it, but I don't feel like it's mine in a way that I could write about it. I mean, 10 years is nothing.
10 years is nothing. I totally agree with that. When I got to Oxford last last summer, I kept thinking, all right, you're just gonna like start writing about Oxford right now. And my subconscious was like, no, you're just not, nope, take some time, you know, get some breaths. So in the chat, we have Melissa Allfoot who says, not a question, but thank you to Melissa. I can't wait to meet Lane and Oliver in the rest of the game. Thank you, Melissa. All right, here's a question from Stella Martin. How does your writing process differ from poetry to fiction?
Yeah, so fiction takes a lot more time. It it requires like longer chunks of time too, because if I have to just stay focused on the scene until it's over, and it's much harder to enter back into it. Poems are short, and you can write a poem in 5 minutes, and then come back later and look at it, and it's not like done, but it is a thing that you can then deal with. Um, with with a novel, that doesn't happen until, like, for me, I'm pretty slow, I think. I worked on this book for 4 or 5 years. So and it's like I was saying earlier, like it's hard to hold it all in your head at one time. So I keep a lot of notes. I'm always like having little post-it notes on things to remind myself of what I put in this scene so that I don't like conflict with it later. Um, it's it feels more like work than writing poems does. Um, yeah, you can write a new poem every day, and that's just a different relationship to time than what fiction requires. Fiction also, like, I mean, prose in general insists on logic in a way that poems don't. Insists on a relationship to like dealing with the passage of time. uh you have to say stuff in order to make fiction make sense that you can skip over in poetry. So it's a different way of thinking too.
And this is for me. Did you always know that you were going to write a novel or write two novels or write many novels?
No, I did not. I When I was a little kid, I knew I wanted to be a writer, and I read a lot of novels, and I read less poetry because I think, like, poetry, we just don't have as much poetry as part of our daily lives. Like, no one does, unless you seek it out. So uh, I I knew I wanted to be a writer. I didn't know about poems so much, but as soon as I discovered poetry, I was like, this is the thing that I'm going to do. Um, and when I first decided to try writing a novel, it was kind of to see if I could do it and to see if I could make money writing. Um, and because I knew all these fiction writers who were selling books, and I got jealous because I could like sell a poem for $10 to a magazine, and they were they were getting like much more than $10. And I was working a job I didn't like, and I just thought, if I could maybe do this, maybe I can do it. And I learned pretty quickly that I could not. I had to teach myself how to do it, and that took a really long time. Um, but yeah, now I like it. I'm glad that I did. I'm glad that I did all that work. Um, it definitely allows me to talk about different things than I can talk about in poetry, and in a different way. And it's really like it's really something to have people like this in your head for so long. That's an experience that I'm really thrilled to have had.
We'll do a couple more questions before we wrap up today. We have a question here from Heath Wooten, and I'm going to add to the question. So Heath asks, how do you avoid overworking a poem? How do you know when it's done? And I want to add to that, how did you know when this book was done?
Okay, yeah, so that's a hard one. I I have overworked a lot of poems and just written the life out of them. And you know, but then if you save all your drafts, once you figure that out, you can go back and start again. So yeah, I think having good readers is really essential, like readers that you trust who can tell you like you know, you need to go back to this where the energy was, you know. um but I also think that like time away helps you to know what it is that you've got, gives you a different perspective. But yeah, it's hard, it's different for every poem, right? So it's really hard to know. um I do try to pay attention to the things that still seem odd or surprising or interesting to me in poems, and if that stays, then that seems like a good goal, like maintain that oddness, um, and not clean it up too much, because that's where the personality in a poem lies. Um, for this book, how did I know it was done? I mean, um, I I think that by the later drafts, there were some problems that I was trying to solve. And I knew that parts of the book were working really well. And once I had solved those problems, uh, so that everything made sense, you know, and so that the timelines worked, and so that things were like emotionally resonant in a way that felt right for the characters. Um, then I just read it all the way through, and um, I mean, 4 times probably, and nothing jumped out at me that felt wrong, you know? So, so I just went with it. But I also like some of these changes, like some of the more recent parts of it that I wrote still feel really fresh and new to me. And I get anxious when I look at those parts because I don't feel like they're vetted or something, you know?
Um, I do want to ask a couple of lightning round questions before we wrap up for today. And these are pretty easy, but I just was curious to know, can you name some of your favorite poets and writers and books?
Yeah. So I love the poet Claire Womenholm. She's got a book called Red Mouth that's really beautiful, a book called Wilder. Um, and I just read this book by a book of poems by Mark Leidner. Um, and it's fantastic. These really, really lovely, kind of absurdist and deeply philosophical love poems that are very funny. And uh, in terms of novels, um, I just read Brandon Taylor's Real Life. I think that book is great. Um, and I love The Secret History by Donna Tartt. That book is something I've thought about a lot over the years. I reread it recently, and it holds up. I liked it as much as I remembered liking it. Um, yeah, I could go on, but I know we're pressed for time.
Well, this question is always waiting. So you've mentioned that you have a book of poetry coming out. Do you have a title for it?
Yeah, it's called Doll Apollo,
All
and
about.
it's part of it's about paper dolls, and part of it is about like conspiracy theories about the Apollo moon landing. And there's a bunch of landscape poems in there, bunch of poems about the moon. So yeah, I'm excited about that. Doll Apollo.
And last question, if there were any writers or poets or artists you could meet from the past who are no longer with us, is there somebody you think of off the top of your head?
Emily Dickinson.
Hmm,
Um, yeah, she's the first person I would go for if I had that option.
that's a good one. I think I do the same thing. All right, that is it. And we're going to bring back in Square Books. Melissa, thank you.
Thank you, Maurice.
Y'all, that was so great. Thank you so much for both spending the beginning of your evening with us. And I also want to thank our attendees for great questions. Sometimes y'all are a little shy, but like, man, this was really wonderful. We have got signed first editions of the House Uptown at Square Books. I dropped a bunch of links for y'all to check out. Personalization is available. We're so proud to have this book on our shelves, and just can't wait to put it on our readers' shelves. And just, I don't know, thank you. Thanks for both of y'all for doing what you're doing. It makes my job a lot more fun. And yeah, we're just so thrilled for you. Thank you.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Of course.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, y'all have a good night. Thank you. Take care.
Good night.
Good night.